10 celebrities who lost the love of their life and were never the same again. Some losses don't just change your life, they change who you are, and for some of the most famous people in the world, that change never really goes away. Because behind the headlines, behind the success, behind the image we think we understand, there are moments that divide everything into two parts. Before and after, and once you cross that line, there's no going back. There's only learning how to live with what remains. And for some people, even that never fully happens. Number 1, Keanu Reeves, the love that changed everything. Before people talk about who Keanu Reeves is today, they often go back to who he was with. Because there was a time when his life looked very different. And at the center of that life was Jennifer Syme. Their relationship wasn't loud. It wasn't constantly in the spotlight, but by all accounts, it was real. They met in the late 1990s, connected quietly, and for a while it seemed like they were building something that was meant to last. And then everything began to change, because Jennifer became pregnant, and for a moment, there was something more than just a relationship. There was a future, plans, expectations, a life that was starting to take shape in a completely different way. But that future never arrived. Their daughter was tragically stillborn, and from that point on, something shifted. Not loudly, not all at once, but in a way that changed everything. The relationship didn't survive the loss. They separated, and not long after, Jennifer Syme died in a car accident. And just like that, what had once been a relationship full of possibility became something else entirely. A memory, a loss layered on top of another loss. And for many people who have followed Keanu Reeves over the years, that moment feels like a dividing line. Because the version of him that came after felt different, quieter, more reserved, more distant from the kind of life he had once seemed to be moving toward. And for a long time, that's how people came to understand him. Someone who carried something heavy, but never spoke about it in full. And then, years later, something shifted again, because in 2009, he met Alexandra Grant. At first, it wasn't a headline, it was a collaboration, a creative partnership. A connection that developed slowly and quietly in a way that felt very different from the relationship people remembered before. Over time, that connection became something more. They began appearing together, publicly but without spectacle, close but without explanation. And for many people watching, it seemed like Keanu Reeves had found companionship again, something steady, something calm, something that didn't try to recreate what had been lost, but existed on its own terms. And yet, years have passed, and there are still things people notice. There has been no wedding, no public engagement, no visible shift toward the kind of long-term commitment people often associate with a relationship that has lasted this long. And that detail, subtle as it may seem, has led to a quieter question. Not one asked loudly, but one that keeps returning. Because when people look at Keanu Reeves today, they're not just seeing the present, they're remembering the past. They're remembering what he had, what he lost, and how suddenly it all disappeared. And that's where the question becomes more emotional, more complicated, more difficult to answer. Will he ever be able to love Alexandra Grant the way he loved Jennifer Syme? Or are some kinds of love the kind that only happen once? Number 2, Liam Neeson, When Love Becomes Memory. For Liam Neeson, the loss was sudden and irreversible. His relationship with Natasha Richardson was one of the rare ones in Hollywood that felt stable, private, grounded, real. They had built a life together over years, a family, a rhythm that didn't rely on attention. And then in 2009, everything changed in a moment. A skiing accident, a fall that didn't seem serious at first, until it was. And within days, she was gone. What followed wasn't just grief, it was silence. A kind of absence that doesn't just take someone away, but reshapes everything that remains. Years later, Liam Neeson has spoken about it in small ways, careful ways, never fully opening the door, but never pretending it didn't matter. And over time, people began to notice something. He didn't rebuild his life the way many expected. He didn't step back into relationships. He didn't replace what had been lost. Instead, he kept moving forward, but in a different way, more contained, more focused, more alone. And that has led to a question that stays with people long after his story is told. Because when someone experiences a loss like that, is moving on really the goal, Or is it simply learning how to live with what's gone? Stories like this make you think differently about love and loss. Take a moment to subscribe, because some stories deserve to be told slowly. Number 3. Brad Pitt, when a life unravels in public. For Brad Pitt, the loss didn't happen quietly. It happened in public, and that changes everything. Because when something breaks behind closed doors, only a few people feel it. But when it happens in front of the world, everyone has an opinion. His relationship with Angelina Jolie was never ordinary. It was intense, highly visible, almost symbolic of something larger than just two people, a family, a partnership, a life that seemed, at least from the outside, complete. And then it ended. Not gradually, not quietly, but in a way that immediately became a global conversation. Legal battles, custody issues, stories from different sides, and over time, something began to shift in how people saw Brad Pitt. Because this wasn't just a breakup, it was a dismantling of a life, of an identity, of something that had once defined him publicly and privately at the same time. And since then, he has spoken differently, more reflective, more aware, more careful with his words, as if something in him had slowed down, changed direction. Some believe he has grown, others feel he has simply adapted. But almost everyone agrees on one thing. The version of him that exists now is not the same as the one who stood beside Angelina Jolie at the height of it all. And that leaves a question that lingers quietly underneath everything. Was that relationship something he moved on from, or something that changed him permanently? Number 4. Britney Spears. A life that changed in front of the world. For Britney Spears, the story isn't just about losing love. It's about losing control and trying to find it again. Because there was a time when she wasn't just famous, she was everywhere, at the center of music, culture, and attention. And then slowly, things began to change. Relationships ended. Public moments became harder to understand, and over time, her life seemed to move further away from the version people once knew. And now, in recent years, that contrast feels sharper than ever, because earlier this year, Britney Spears was arrested and later charged with a misdemeanor DUI after reports of erratic driving in California. Not long after, she entered a rehabilitation facility, a move some saw as an attempt to take control again. She has since been released, with reports suggesting she is in a more stable place as she faces what comes next. But for many people watching, this isn't just about one incident. It's about the pattern, the years of ups and downs, the moments where things seemed to stabilize, and the moments where everything felt uncertain again. And that's where the conversation becomes more emotional. Because when people look at Britney Spears today, they're not just seeing who she is now, they're remembering who she used to be, and wondering what changed in between. Some believe it's the pressure, some point to the relationships, others feel it's something deeper, something that can't be explained from the outside. But whatever the reason, there's a sense that something shifted a long time ago. And that shift never fully reversed. And maybe that's the real question people keep coming back to. Not just what happened, but whether someone who goes through that much ever truly finds their way back. Number 5. Ben Affleck. The return that didn't last. For Ben Affleck, the story is different, because in his case, the past came back. And for a moment, it looked like everything might work out differently this time. His relationship with Jennifer Garner had already ended years earlier. A marriage, a family, a life that slowly came apart. And after that, there were struggles, public ones, personal ones, moments that people saw, and moments they didn't. And then, unexpectedly, he returned to Jennifer Lopez. A relationship from the past, revisited, rebuilt, reimagined. And for a while, it felt like a second chance, like something unfinished had finally found its ending. But then, it ended again. And this time, it felt heavier, because it wasn't just a breakup, it was the closing of a chapter that had already been reopened once before. And that has led to quiet speculation. Not confirmed, not stated directly, but present in the way people talk about him. Some fans have wondered whether going back was ever really about moving forward, or whether it was about trying to hold on to something that never fully left. And when something ends twice, it raises a different kind of question. Was it ever meant to last, or was it always something that belonged to a different time? Number 6. Tom Cruise. The life that took a different direction. Cool. For Tom Cruise, the story is quieter, but in some ways more noticeable. Because while his career has remained at the highest level, his personal life has taken a very different path. His marriage to Nicole Kidman once felt like one of the defining relationships in Hollywood. Two people at the peak of their careers, sharing a life that seemed stable, balanced, and complete. And then it ended. And over time, something changed. Because while Tom Cruise remained visible professionally, his personal life became more distant, more private, more difficult to define. No long-term relationship has taken the same place since. No visible attempt to recreate what once existed. And that absence is what people notice. Because when someone has experienced something that's significant and then never returns to it, it raises a quiet question. Not about success, not about career, but about something more personal. Did he choose that life? Or did something in his past relationships shape the way he lives now? And perhaps more importantly, did he lose something he was never able to replace? If you've stayed this far, you're seeing something most people miss. Subscribe now because the next part goes even deeper into stories that don't get talked about enough. Number 7. Pierce Brosnan, the love that never left. For Pierce Brosnan, the loss didn't fade with time. If anything, it stayed. Quietly, consistently, in the way he speaks, in the way he remembers, in the way certain names still carry weight, even decades later. Because before everything else, before the roles, before the recognition, there was Cassandra Harris. Their relationship wasn't just a chapter. It was a foundation, a partnership built during the early years of his life and career. A time when everything still felt uncertain and shared. They built a life together, a family, a rhythm, something steady. And then illness entered that life. Quietly at first, then completely. And over time, it took everything with it. When Cassandra Harris passed away, it wasn't just the loss of a partner. It was the loss of a version of life that could never be recreated. And even years later, that loss is still present. Not loudly, but in a way that never quite disappears. Because some relationships don't end when someone is gone. They stay in memory, in feeling, in the way a person continues to carry them forward. And when people listen to Pierce Brosnan speak about her even now, there's a sense that some connections don't fade. They don't weaken. They don't get replaced. They simply become part of who you are. And that leaves a question that lingers long after the story is told. Can something like that ever truly be replaced? Or does it just become something you learn to live alongside? Number 8. Elvis Presley, the moment everything began to change. For Elvis Presley, the loss wasn't sudden, it was gradual, but no less significant, because his relationship with Priscilla Presley wasn't just part of his life, it was central to it. She was there through the rise, through the chaos, through the moments when fame became something overwhelming, something difficult to manage, and for a time she represented stability, a connection that grounded him in a life that was constantly shifting. But over time, that stability began to change. The pressures of fame, the demands of his career, the environment surrounding him, all of it slowly created distance. And eventually, that distance became separation. And for many people who have looked back on Elvis Presley's life, that moment stands out. Not as the end of everything, but as the beginning of something else. A different phase, a different version of him. Because after that, things didn't feel the same. Not in the way he lived, not in the way he appeared, not in the way he seemed to carry himself through the world. Some believe the separation marked a turning point, a shift that went deeper than the surface, a moment where something essential was lost and never fully replaced. And that leaves a question that has followed his story ever since. Was that the moment everything began to change, or was it simply the moment when what had already been changing became impossible to ignore? Number 9. Hugh Jackman, when something that lasted ends. For Hugh Jackman, the loss feels different, because it wasn't sudden and it wasn't short-lived. It came after decades, a lifetime in many ways. His relationship with Deborah Lee Furness lasted for years. Not just years, but years that shaped who he became. They built a life together, quietly, steadily, away from the kind of chaos that often surrounds Hollywood relationships. And for a long time, they were seen as something rare, a partnership that lasted, that endured, that didn't fall apart under pressure. And then it ended. And for many people, that was harder to understand than anything else, because when something short ends, it makes sense. But when something long ends, it raises questions. What changed? What happened? What does it mean when something that lasted that long still comes to an end? And that's where the emotional weight of his story sits. Not in the loss itself, but in what that loss represents. Because starting over after something like that isn't the same as starting over at the beginning. It's different, even if they don't say it out loud. Is it harder to lose love early in life or after you've built an entire life around it? Number 10, Clint Eastwood. When distance becomes a pattern. For Clint Eastwood, the story isn't about one loss, it's about a pattern. A series of relationships, some public, some private, that over time began to feel more distant, more contained, more guarded. His relationship with Sandra Locke was one of the most defining, intense, complicated, highly visible at the time. And when it ended, it didn't just close a chapter, it changed the way people saw him, and perhaps the way he moved through relationships after that. Because over time, something became noticeable, a shift toward privacy, toward distance, toward a version of life that felt less open and more contained. And that has led to quiet speculation. Not loud, not dramatic, but present. Some believe that certain experiences don't just end, they reshape the way a person connects with others, they create distance, not out of indifference, but out of protection. And when that happens, it doesn't always reverse, it becomes a pattern. And that leaves a final question. Do some experiences change the way a person loves permanently? The part no one talks about. Because when you step back and look at all of these stories together, a pattern begins to appear. Different people, different lives, different kinds of loss. But the same quiet question underneath all of them. What happens after love is gone? Not just in the moment, not just in the first days or weeks or even years, but long after, when life continues, when the world keeps moving, when everything looks normal again from the outside. Because the truth is, some people move on, they rebuild, they start again, they find something new. And for others, it's different. They keep going, but something in them stays connected to what they lost. Not in a way that stops life, but in a way that quietly reshapes it. And maybe that's the part people don't always understand. That moving forward doesn't always mean leaving something behind. Sometimes it means carrying it with you, forever. And if you've made it this far, you've probably felt something while listening to these stories. Maybe you thought about someone, maybe you remembered something, maybe you asked yourself a question you don't usually stop to ask. And that's exactly why this channel exists. Not just to tell stories, but to explore the parts of life people don't always talk about. The quiet changes, the unseen moments, the things that stay with us long after everything else moves on. So if this kind of story speaks to you, take a moment to subscribe, because the next one might feel even closer than this one did. And before you go, tell me this in the comments. Do you believe people ever truly move on from a love like that? Or do they just learn to live with it?